Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. What would you do if an HOA you've never heard of mailed you a fine with photos taken on your property? I laughed. Until they escalated, trespassed, and started treating my private road like a public boat launch. So I did something that turned their own rule book into a weapon, and it worked. I inherited my grandfather's property 3 years ago. It's not fancy, just a small cabin on about 8 acres of wooded land in northern Michigan. The property sits about half a mile back from the main highway, and the real feature, the thing that made it special to my family for generations, was the access road. This wasn't just any driveway. This was a proper gravel road, wide enough for 2 cars to pass, that ran from the highway, through my property, and ended at a small dock and boat launch area on Cedar Lake. This wasn't a public road. It was completely private, built and maintained by whoever owned our land. My grandfather built it back in the 1960s when he bought the property using his own money and equipment. Now, here's something important that becomes relevant later. The lake itself is what's called a private lake. It's not owned by the state or county. When my grandfather bought the property, the deed included ownership rights to a section of the lake bed and water rights. It's complicated legal stuff involving riparian rights, but basically my family owns a portion of the actual lake, not just the shoreline. Most people don't realize private lakes exist, but they do, especially in older rural areas where land was divided up before modern zoning laws. The rest of the lake is divided among other property owners who have deeds going back just as far. For as long as I can remember, my grandfather let the neighbors use the road. It was just how things were done. There were maybe 4 or 5 other families with property near the lake, and everyone knew everyone. Nobody abused the privilege. If someone needed to bring a boat down, they'd usually give Grandpa a call first, just as a courtesy. When he passed and I inherited the place, I kept the same arrangement. The neighbors were respectful, and I saw no reason to change things. Then, about 4 years ago, everything shifted. A development company bought up a large parcel of land on the far side of the lake and built Cedar Lake Estates. 65 new homes, all part of a planned community with an HOA. The developer marketed these homes as luxury lakefront living, and according to the sales materials I saw later, they heavily advertised private lake access as one of the main selling points. Here's the problem. The only proper access point to the lake was the dock and boat launch area at the end of my road. There were other points where the lake touched various properties, sure, but most of the shoreline was marshy or too steep. The dock area was the only spot with an actual boat ramp and proper facilities. The developer knew this, and apparently just assumed that because there was an existing road that people used, it must be some kind of public access or easement. It wasn't. It was completely private and always had been. At first, I didn't think much of the new development. I'd see more cars going down the road, more boats at the dock area, but it didn't seem excessive. I figured the new residents would eventually introduce themselves, maybe we'd work out some formal arrangement. That's how things had always worked. That's not what happened. Last summer, I finally got around to buying a boat. Nothing fancy, a 15-year-old aluminum fishing boat with a 25-horsepower motor that I picked up for $3,000 from a guy downstate. I kept it on a trailer next to the cabin under a tarp like thousands of other people do with their boats. About a week after I got the boat, I noticed a couple people walking up my driveway taking pictures. When I went out to ask what they were doing, they said they were from the HOA doing a neighborhood compliance check. I told them this wasn't their neighborhood and asked them to leave. They seemed annoyed but left without much argument. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured they were just overzealous busybodies who didn't understand property boundaries. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from the Cedar Lake Estates Homeowners Association. According to the letter, I was in violation of HOA rules regarding unsightly storage of recreational vehicles, and I was being fined $200. The letter included photos of my boat, the same photos those people had taken, and referenced several specific sections of the HOA covenant regarding property maintenance and aesthetic standards. I read the letter 3 times, certain I was missing something. I didn't live in Cedar Lake Estates. I'd never signed any agreement with their HOA. My property predated their development by 5 decades. How could they possibly think they had authority to fine me? I called the number on the letter and got someone who introduced herself as the HOA compliance officer. I explained that there must be some mistake. I never signed any agreement with Cedar Lake Estates. I don't live in their development, and my property has never been part of any HOA. She seemed confused at first, put me on hold for a few minutes, then came back and insisted that their authority extended to all properties with lake access within a certain radius of their development. I told her that wasn't how property law works. She just kept repeating that the fine stood and that if I didn't pay within 30 days, it would increase. I hung up and called my uncle who'd handled my grandfather's estate. He looked into it and confirmed what I already knew. There was absolutely no legal mechanism by which the HOA could have any authority over my property. He suggested I send them a certified letter explaining this and keep documentation of everything. I did exactly that. I sent a detailed letter, certified mail, explaining that my property was not part of Cedar Lake Estates, that I had never signed any agreement with their HOA, and that they had no legal authority to fine me for anything. I included copies of my property deed showing the dates and boundaries. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. The fine had been increased to $400 for non-compliance and failure to respond to HOA communications. They'd apparently decided that my letter explaining why they had no authority over me didn't count as proper response. This was getting ridiculous. I tried calling again, this time asking to speak to someone on the HOA board. I got transferred around a few times before reaching someone who identified himself as the HOA president. I went through the whole explanation again. My property isn't part of the HOA, they have no authority to fine me. This is harassment. He was dismissive. He said that all properties with lake access were subject to HOA oversight, that this was standard procedure, and that if I had a problem with it, I should take it up with the proper channels. When I asked what proper channels those were, he just said I should consult with the HOA's legal counsel and hung up. That weekend, I drove up to the cabin. When I got there, I found a bright orange sticker plastered on my boat. It was one of those violation stickers that HOAs use, the kind that leave residue when you peel them off. This one said violation notice in huge letters and had the same information as the letters I'd been receiving. They'd been on my property. The road from the highway goes through my land for about a quarter mile before reaching the cabin area. They'd driven past multiple private property signs posted at the road entrance and along the way, then walked up to where the boat was parked to stick this thing on it. I took photos of everything. The sticker, the boat, the property line markers, all of it. Then I called my uncle again. "I think it's time to get an attorney involved," he said. The attorney my uncle recommended was a property law specialist named Patricia Morrison. She'd handled several cases involving HOA disputes and easement issues. I met with her the following Tuesday and laid out everything that had happened. She listened to the whole story, looked through all the documentation I'd brought, and then started laughing. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of HOA overreach I've seen in years," she said. "They have absolutely no legal standing here, but I think we can do better than just telling them to stop." She explained that if the HOA truly believed they had some kind of authority over lake access properties, and if residents of Cedar Lake Estates were regularly using my private road, we needed to make it crystal clear what the actual legal situation was. She drafted a letter. It was 6 pages long, dense with legal citations, and it laid out several key points. First, my property was private and had never been part of any HOA agreement. The deed was clear and dated back decades before Cedar Lake Estates existed. Second, the access road was entirely private, built and maintained with private funds on private property. There was no easement, no public right-of-way, and no legal obligation for me to allow anyone to use it. Third, the HOA's attempts to levy fines against a non-member for activities on private property could constitute harassment and potentially open them up to legal liability. Fourth, and this was the important part, any Cedar Lake Estates residents who had been using my private road to access the lake had been doing so without legal authorization. While I had previously allowed this as a courtesy, the HOA's actions had forced me to reconsider this arrangement. The letter concluded with a demand. The HOA would immediately cease all contact with me, provide written acknowledgement that they had no authority over my property, reimburse me for legal fees incurred, and issue a formal apology. If these demands weren't met within 14 days, we would proceed with legal action, including potential claims for harassment, trespassing, and interference with property rights. Patricia sent the letter via certified mail to the HOA board, their compliance officer, and the lawyer whose name had appeared on their letterhead. Then we waited. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was the HOA president, the same guy who'd been dismissive before. His tone was completely different now. "Mr. Peterson, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he started. I cut him off. "Any communication needs to go through my attorney." You have her contact information. Please, let's just talk about this reasonably. Through my attorney, I repeated and hung up. Over the next week, I got 4 more calls from various HOA board members. I didn't answer any of them. Patricia got several calls too, which she documented but didn't return. We'd given them clear terms in the letter. Either they met those terms, or we'd proceed with legal action. On day 13, I received a package via courier. Inside was a check for $2,000 made out to me, along with a signed letter from the HOA board. The letter acknowledged that my property was private, that they had no authority over it, that their previous fines were issued in error, and that they apologized for any inconvenience. It was exactly what we'd asked for, but Patricia advised me not to cash the check immediately. Let's see if they actually change their behavior first, she said. Words are cheap. She was right to be cautious, because while the HOA board had agreed to our terms, the residents of Cedar Lake Estates were about to discover what those terms actually meant. That lawyer's letter demanding I comply with HOA regulations had given me an idea during the whole mess. A beautifully petty idea. After we received the settlement letter, I called Patricia and asked her a hypothetical question. If I were to comply with every single HOA regulation in their handbook, could they do anything about it? She was confused at first, but then I explained my plan and she started laughing. The HOA had demanded I comply with their rules. Fine, I'd comply. With all of them. I got a copy of the Cedar Lake Estates HOA handbook. 78 pages of regulations covering everything from lawn maintenance to acceptable paint colors to noise restrictions to vehicle parking. And buried in there was Section 12.4. All residents must obtain written approval from the HOA board for any guests using community amenities, including lake access. Applications must be submitted 48 hours in advance and include names, vehicle descriptions, and planned duration of visit. See where I'm going with this? I sent a letter to the HOA board copying their lawyer. The letter stated that in the interest of being a good neighbor and complying with their regulations as they demanded, I would be requiring every single person from Cedar Lake Estates who wished to use my road to access the lake to first submit an application to me 48 hours in advance, including their name, vehicle description, and planned duration of visit per their own Section 12.4. Furthermore, per Section 8.2 regarding quiet hours, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. on weekdays, 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. on weekends, I would be enforcing these times on anyone using the lake access via my road. Per Section 15.7 regarding waste disposal, I would be conducting inspections of the dock and boat launch area and road, and any trash left behind would result in revocation of that household's access privileges. And per Section 3.1 regarding compliance with community standards, I reserve the right to deny access to anyone whose boat, vehicle, or recreational equipment did not meet aesthetic standards as I saw fit to interpret them, just as they had attempted to do with my boat. I concluded the letter by thanking them for encouraging me to familiarize myself with their comprehensive regulations, and assured them I would enforce every single rule with the same vigor they had shown in trying to enforce their regulations on my private property. The letter went out on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, I'd received exactly 43 access application emails from panicked residents who had weekend plans and were terrified I'd actually enforce this. I responded to each one with a detailed form I'd created, requiring multiple signatures, emergency contact information, proof of boat insurance, and a $50 processing fee for my time spent reviewing applications. On Saturday morning, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. Then I started getting angry emails. Then my attorney started getting calls. Patricia called me, barely able to contain her laughter. They're losing their minds over there. The HOA president called me twice already this morning. Good, I said. They can submit their concerns in writing, following proper procedure. Saturday afternoon, I drove up to the property. There were 3 cars parked at the top of my access road, clearly belonging to Cedar Lake Estates residents who'd planned to spend the day at the lake. I walked up to the first car and knocked on the window. "Can I help you?" I asked. The driver, a man in his 50s wearing a fishing vest, looked annoyed. "We're trying to get to the lake. What's with all this application nonsense?" "This is a private road on private property," I explained politely. "I'm now requiring advance permission for anyone to use it. Did you submit an application?" "This is ridiculous. We've been using this road for years." "Yes, as a courtesy that I extended. A courtesy that your HOA abused when they tried to fine me for having a boat on my own property. So now we're going to do things formally. You're currently parked on my private property without permission. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. He sputtered something about calling the HOA president, but eventually backed up and left. The other two cars followed. On Monday morning, the HOA president called Patricia's office and asked for an emergency meeting. She agreed with the condition that I'd be present and that everything would be on the record. We met at Patricia's office on Wednesday. The HOA president was there along with 2 board members and their attorney. A different attorney than the one whose name had been on their original letters, I noticed. The president started with an attempted friendly approach. Mr. Peterson, we all want to be reasonable here. This application system is causing a lot of frustration for our residents. I'm simply complying with HOA regulations, I said calmly. These are your rules from your handbook. I'm just applying them to the situation, exactly as you insisted I follow your rules regarding my boat. Those rules are for our residents, not for you to enforce on them, one of the board members interjected. Interesting, Patricia said, pulling out a folder. So you're acknowledging that HOA rules only apply to HOA members? That's exactly the argument we made when you were trying to find Mr. Peterson. Their attorney cleared his throat. Perhaps we can all agree that the previous misunderstanding regarding Mr. Peterson's property has been resolved and we can move forward with a more cooperative arrangement? I'd love to be cooperative, I said. Right after we clarify exactly what authority the HOA thinks it has over my private road. The answer, which took them 20 minutes to admit, was none. They had no authority over my road. They never had. The original developer had marketed the properties with lake access, and the HOA had just assumed there was some kind of legal right-of-way or public access. There wasn't. So every resident of Cedar Lake Estates who wants to use the lake has to go through your application process? The president asked, sounding defeated. Well, I said, that's one option. The other option is that we establish a formal easement agreement. Your residents get legal, documented access to the lake via my road, with clear terms that everyone understands. In exchange, I get compensation for the use of my private property and the increased maintenance costs. Their attorney asked what I had in mind. Patricia slid a document across the table. She'd prepared it ahead of time, anticipating this would come up. The easement would cost them a one-time payment of $50,000, which worked out to about $300 per household in the development, plus annual maintenance fees of $5,000. Patricia had helped me arrive at these figures based on comparable easement costs in the area and the estimated annual wear on the road. The document also included clear terms. The easement only granted access for lake use, didn't grant any HOA authority over my property, and included provisions that I could revoke access for any household that violated terms, including trespassing beyond the road boundaries or leaving trash. We'll need to present this to the full board and the residents, the president said. Of course, Patricia replied. You have 30 days. In the meantime, the application system stays in place. They were not happy, but they didn't have much choice. We all signed a preliminary agreement outlining the terms and the timeline. Over the next month, things got interesting. Some Cedar Lake Estates residents were furious with me, like I was the bad guy for enforcing property rights on my own land. There were angry posts about me on their community Facebook page, which I only knew about because one of the reasonable residents, who thought the whole thing was justified, shared screenshots with me. But there were also residents who were angry with the HOA and the developer. They'd paid premium prices for lake access properties, and now they were finding out that access was never actually secured. The HOA's own legal counsel had to send a letter to all residents explaining the situation, and it didn't make the HOA board look good. Some residents tried going around my road to access the lake from other points. Most discovered why the boat launch area at the end of my road was the only practical access point. The shoreline elsewhere was either too marshy, too steep, or on other people's private property where they also weren't welcome to trespass. During that month, I processed about 15 applications per weekend. I approved most of them, though I did deny a few, including one from the same board member who'd been most aggressive in the meeting after I found beer cans left on my property near the dock with a date stamp that matched his approved access day. When I revoked his access privileges, he tried to argue. I pointed out Section 15.7 of their own handbook regarding waste disposal and asked if he'd like me to enforce it more strictly across all applicants. He didn't bring it up again. At the end of the 30 days, the HOA called another meeting. They'd put the easement agreement to a vote of all Cedar Lake Estates residents. It passed, though not unanimously. 68% voted in favor. The rest either voted against it or wanted to explore other options, though no one could articulate what those other options might be since there weren't any. We finalized the easement agreement a few weeks later. I received the $50,000 payment by cashier's check, and the annual maintenance fee was set up through the HOA's accounts. In exchange, Cedar Lake Estates residents got documented legal access to the lake through my road. The agreement also made one thing very clear: the HOA had no authority over my property, none. The easement gave their residents permission to use the road for lake access, and that was it. It did not give them the right to regulate my cabin, my dock, my boat, or anything else on my land. I removed the application requirement after the agreement was signed, but I installed a proper gate with a keypad at the road entrance. The HOA manages the code for authorized residents, and if anyone abuses access, I can revoke that household's privileges. Funny how quickly everyone learned to follow the rules once they were rules I actually had the right to enforce. Over the next few months, things settled down. Most residents were fine. They used the road, launched their boats, cleaned up after themselves, and went home. A few still seemed annoyed, but they kept it to themselves. The HOA board saw turnover at the next election. 3 of the 5 board members were replaced, including the president who had been so dismissive on the phone. The new board was much more reasonable and mostly focused on actual community issues instead of trying to extend their power over property they did not own. I also heard that some residents looked into taking action against the original developer for advertising private lake access without ever securing the access legally. That apparently went nowhere because the developer's company had already folded, but it explained why so much anger landed on the HOA board. They had been selling people a benefit that depended entirely on my goodwill. As for me, I finally got to enjoy my boat without harassment. The easement payment funded some improvements to the cabin and dock area. The annual maintenance fees now cover gravel, drainage work, and basic upkeep on the road. So the access is safer, the rules are clear, and everyone knows exactly where the HOA's authority ends. Every time I see the keypad gate at the entrance to my road, I smile. They demanded that I follow their HOA rules, so I did. I used their own lake access rules, their own guest approval language, their own quiet hour policies, and their own compliance standards. And suddenly, when those rules applied to their residents using my property, they were not so enthusiastic about strict enforcement anymore. The boat is still parked in the same spot next to my cabin, under the same tarp. No orange stickers, no violation notices, no fines. Just my boat, on my property, exactly where it belongs. The next one is a malicious compliance story. It seems that you people love my malicious compliance truck stories, all of which are true. And this one will be no different. In this episode, I am driving the Twin Stick R model Mack boom truck, the largest in our fleet. This truck was big, heavy, and it had an unusually wide turning radius. At that time, I delivered construction materials, while we had residential and commercial materials. I often focused on new construction and commercial sites due to the truck being so large. Every once in a while, I would get a residential delivery. Mostly these deliveries I could make from the street without having to pull on the property. This is not one of those stories. So this one day, I am told I am doing a residential roofing delivery to the roof of the house. My radar is now on because I am familiar with the roads in that area, and they are narrow. Delivery to the roof means I have to enter the property and get right up to the house. I get loaded and get to the job. As I approach the job site, the road is narrow, barely 20 feet wide. The house is on my left and facing the property. The driveway is on the left. Important in a second. I stop and go find the person in charge. He says, "You're right on time. I need you in the driveway and boom across the roof." I say that's great, but there are several issues. 1, all the vehicles parked on the street need moved down past the neighbor's house for me to fit down this road. 2, I cannot make the turn from the street onto the driveway without driving across the lawn, backing up 2 or 3 times. 3, I cannot guarantee that driveway can support the weight. He shouts, "I'll move the trucks and you just get your truck in here," in a very demeaning tone. I say, "Okay, I will." As I back down the street to the intersection, turn around and back up the road, he gets all the trucks moved. I get into position to pull on the property and stop. I grab my clipboard and jump out. I walk up to him and say, "I need you to sign this. We carry legal forms in the trucks that when signed makes the signee or their company responsible for any damage to the property, truck, load, or towing fees to get the truck off site." He signs and all but throws the clipboard at me. Well, okay then, game on. I turn into the yard and pull across the driveway and back up 4 times to get the truck completely on asphalt. Once in the best position I could get, I got out and looked at my handiwork. 8-inch ruts all across the front, 29 feet of yard from the street. Each edge where the tires went from grass to asphalt or asphalt to grass, the driveway collapsed and broke away. The rest of the driveway had several 6-inch ruts that were at least a foot wide on most of the driveway. But I am not done yet. I have to put down my outriggers to stabilize the boom, because the driveway was as wide as the truck meant that when I put them down they would be in the lawn. I carried large blocks to enlarge the footprint of the outriggers to get stability on soft ground. This left 2 more 10-inch holes in the yard, about 3 foot by 4 foot square. I delivered the entire load with no issue. Then the homeowner came home as I was climbing off the boom and started screaming at me for the state of his driveway and yard. I calmly turned and pointed to the job foreman and said, "You need to talk to him," then turned back around and finished wrapping up the truck. I could hear them as they were screaming at each other but could not understand what they were saying. The final insult, I had to ask them both to move their vehicles so I could back out. And yes, more ruts were made leaving. I paused on the street for a minute to check out my handiwork. It was bad. I got back to the warehouse and the bosses cornered me before I could get into the office. The contractor's boss had blown up my boss's phone with threats and complaints. I quickly explained and pulled out the signed affidavit. Boss said, "Well, okay then, we're covered," and I heard nothing more about it. That affidavit has saved my ass a lot over the years and has afforded me some great and funny malicious compliance over the years. The next one is an entitled people story. My dad is 70 and I am a 40-year-old woman. He expects me to take care of him now, but I honestly do not want to. Am I wrong for feeling that way? I think I mostly need to vent. For context, he wants me to act like he was a good present father, but he was not. He seems stuck on memories from before the accident, but I do not remember those years the way he does. When I was 8 years old, I was in a car accident with my mom and my siblings. A drunk driver hit us. My mom did not survive, and I became a paraplegic. My dad was at the hospital a lot immediately after the accident, but that only lasted about 6 weeks. After that, I maybe saw him once a week for the rest of my 4-month hospital stay. After I left the hospital, I went to live with my maternal grandparents. Before the accident, I had been living with my mom and dad in the home I would eventually move back into years later. During the first year after leaving the hospital, I maybe saw my dad 3 times a month. Then it became even less frequent. The kicker is that he lived in the same neighborhood and often had to pass our house to leave. Sometimes he would stop by to say hello and make small talk. Other times he would just drive past. He was not in charge of my care. He did not handle doctor's appointments, physical therapy, school, or anything like that. My grandparents were my safe place and my rock. I love and miss them dearly. They helped me adjust to my new limitations and to the loss of my mom. They did everything they could to make sure I did not feel like I was missing anything, and they helped me become the stable, independent woman I am today. My grandmother eventually became my legal guardian. When I was 14, my dad was sentenced to 15 years in jail on a drug charge. According to him, he was just with the wrong people at the wrong time. I felt bad for him, but by then I did not really miss him. He already had not been very involved in my life for years. If I had a problem, needed something, or had to rely on someone, he was not the person I went to. I did receive a settlement from the accident, and I think that is why when I was 16 he started telling me he needed money for better lawyers and commissary. That continued until he was released. Then once he got out, he expected to move in with me. By that time I was 29 and had accomplished a lot. Although I am a paraplegic, I am very independent. I graduated, learned a trade, did a few years of college, was working, and was living alone. I was doing pretty well, especially considering doctors had once said I might not even finish grade school because of my head injury. I had moved into my family home, which had been abandoned for a few years and needed a lot of work. It took a lot of money to make it livable and accessible. My dad had never made any modifications to the house, not even so I could access it. Over the years, he has pressured me, guilted me, and manipulated me about money many times. It has been extremely stressful and has caused me a lot of panic. I assume he thinks I still have enough money to take care of both myself and him. He does not remember the settlement details, and I will never tell him. I work hard to save because as I age, I may need more help. I am single and have no children, and if I can help it, I do not want to become a burden to anyone. I am currently in therapy, dealing with issues connected to him, including abandonment and self-worth. He has vaguely apologized for how he treated us, but he mostly only wants to talk about his own hardships and pain, as if I do not wake up every day with my own. For a while, I was on the fence about letting him move in. Part of that was because he still had the title of father. Some family members also pressured me, and I was trying to figure out what the right thing was in line with my faith. However, other people have advised me not to let him in, for the sake of my mental health and financial stability. Since his release, he has not had a steady official job, any real savings, or social security. He has stayed with family and friends without paying rent, and no one kicked him out. But then he chose to leave the last friend he was staying with and move somewhere that required rent. Despite not having a real job, he constantly complains about how hard life is. Now he expects me and my brother to take care of all his needs. My brother does not talk to him. For the last few weeks, I have not spoken to him either after his latest attempt at guilt-tripping, manipulating, and insulting me. I understand that he is desperate, and part of me does feel sorry for him. But I think I am done. Am I wrong for not wanting to take care of him? I am looking for advice and maybe some support. Anyway, thank you for watching.